I'm Tim Kittro, and here to bring home the bacon are Big Rye and the Fat Guy.
What is up, YouTube? It's Big Rye and the Fat Guy coming at you with the NFL picks against the spread for Week 3 of the 23-24 NFL season. Fat Guy, we are just 0.2% under 55% for the very early 2 weeks. On to the Thursday night game, New York Giants at the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers opened as 10-point favorites at minus 106. They've moved up to 10.5-point favorites, but the juice at plus 106. Who you got?
We're going to be taking the New York Football Giants. The 1 point of intrigue I would say for this game is it's interesting to see if how many fantasy bids are going to, fantasy survivor picks are going to be on San Francisco. So I always add in a little bit of tidbit of like where to look for edges. So a quick one here would be you don't want to pick the worst team and you don't want to pick the best team in a survivor. And how contrarian you want to go is based on how deep the field is. So this is probably one of the bigger fades for the entire week. Pending on it, there is Dallas and Kansas City to come up. But this is one where like you might want to fade and perhaps take someone like Jacksonville, even though they're at very similar valuation. But as far as the spread goes, we're going to be taking the New York Giants plus 10.
That guy. Next up, LA Chargers at the Minnesota Vikings. Vikings were 1 point underdogs at minus 110. They're still 1 point underdogs at minus 111. So barely any move in this market. Who you got?
Well, we're going to be taking Minnesota Vikings. There's a lot of injuries to the Vikings, and I don't think they've had a palatable set of games, to put it mildly. Neither have the LA Chargers, though, to be fair. So I do think that this hasn't had as much line movement as I would like to see. This opened, they say at Pinnacle at minus 10, but I think that's an error according to Unabated. But it looks like that was corrected, and it opened at minus 1. It still is minus 1. This is probably a line that's very difficult to beat, considering it's been very, very limited market fluctuations in the, I guess this is the third day it's open. So we're just going to a chalk pick. We're going to be taking the Minnesota Vikings.
I think we would have loved to get either side plus 10. On to the next one,
Yes,
Buffalo Bills
yes.
at the Washington Football Commanders. Commanders open plus 6.5 point underdogs at home at minus 106. The juices moved to minus 108. Barely any movement in this game as well. Fat Guy, who you got?
Yeah, open at 6.5. Currently 6.5 with a slight shift in juice. We're going to be taking the Washington Commanders. There is Ron Rivera has been involved in a prop that I've been very successful with this year, and I have to give a tip of the hat, tip of the shades to good old Riverboat Ron here. And now I can't tell you what angle it is because this would affect my living. And I was thinking about it too. It would only take one of you, just one of you, to figure out what I was doing, to try and replicate it, and then share it to other people. Like that's how secretive you have to be. So I understand that I've been very long-winded and vague. It's because giving away direct angles that I've worked very hard and spent thousands of dollars on. That's I hate to tell it to you, when you're trying to corral data that nobody else has, think about the rarity. Anything that is rare is valuable, and rare data is valuable. So you're either going to be paying the nose through time or you're going to be paying money for automation. Unless you're a very good coder, then you can kind of bypass that. But anyways, you end up having to collaborate, even if you're relatively competent in scraping or coding or what have you. A lot of times you have to outsource parts of the project to effectively automate something. So there's a lot that goes into it. That's why I can't just splash out an angle. So but that being said, the point of all that diatribe is that if you look hard enough, look at all the offerings they have for the game, I'm sure you can come up with an idea of maybe something someone hasn't looked at thoroughly. Because a lot of times they just put out pricing on things or they put out events with carnival pricing, and not a lot of thought goes into it, and they just think nobody can beat the juice. Generally, nobody can unless one were so inclined. I think I'm quoting Fight Club there. I haven't seen that movie in a long time. But anyways, we're going to be taking the Washington Commanders, my least favorite name in the NFL, and on to the next.
Fat guy, next up, the New Orleans Saints travel to Green Bay to take on the Packers, who opened as 2-point favorites at minus 106. They're currently 2-point favorites at minus 104. Who you got?
See, New Orleans is actually surprising me. I think this is like one of the teams like I generally don't like talking about team strength in my perception because I don't think that really matters. But this is a team I do feel that is overachieving. Not that they've had stunning results or anything, but I'm really not that confident. And they had, it's against my opinion too. They had a lot stronger. I believe roughly a 9 expected wins according to the market, which is more than I would think for a team that seems to be uninspiring on offense, not woeful or anything. But this line the market seems to like it. The line moved from 1.5 even at open. I'm looking at the wrong. I'm looking at a consensus line. As far as Pinnacle goes, it's 2, stayed at 2. So the consensus line moved from 1.5 to 2.5 as it currently is, but Pinnacle has been holding it steady from 2 the entire way up. But this is also a more shallow market because they also played last night. So regardless of my feelings of the New Orleans Saints, we're going to take the good juice and we're going to take the Saints -2.
+2. Atlanta Falcons
+2,
at the Detroit Lions. Lions -4. Open at -4 at minus 106. They've moved to -3 at minus 120. Fat guy, who you got?
Well, we're going to be taking the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Big Rye likes to use this metric as a rough estimate in terms of coaching strength. And if I do recall, Big Rye, Arthur Smith was up there for covering coaches.
I think he was one of the best last year. I'm not even sure this year. They must be 2-0 against the spread this year.
2-0. They blew out Carolina, and they were anywhere
slight
between
dogs, and they won week 2.
Yeah, week 2, -2 to +2, like in that range, and they pulled off a really nice comeback victory. Although the throwing with Desmond Ridder, I'm not sure that was a good idea. Regardless, they are also going to be my pick this week. This is another interesting thing too. You can always think of is, has the market caught up to perhaps the strategies of a team like Atlanta? Because it's a bad quarterback, strong running team. Oddly enough, and again, I rarely talk about games and my opinions on them. It feels like Bijan Robinson has value, which is very hard for me to say about any running back. But again, we'll see how. But that's value versus a rookie contract. Maybe in the first round. We'll see how that 5 years pans out. This is only week 3. That being said, we're going to take Atlanta. They opened as 4-point dogs. It's been pushed down to 3. So we're going to be taking the good number here that's listed, and we're going to take the Falcons and the points.
Next up, Fat Guy, the Tennessee Titans travel to Cleveland to take on the Browns, who opened as 3.5-point favorites, but this line has pushed down to 3, as well as the juice on Tennessee at +3, -114. So this is a more drastic line move than it looks like from this 3.5 to 3.
Absolutely. There's a lot of win probability that shifted. I'm going to quickly pull up the money line just to give you a small perspective on how that may have changed over the course. So Cleveland opened at -189, and they're currently at -151. Now you could use that's juice in though. So that's more like -178 to -140, 141, just to give you a rough idea. But that true probability, that's a very big shift in win probability. Perhaps there's I can't imagine that they're not using like the priors of Deshaun Watson, because I think he was overestimated perhaps in the beginning. I mean, that would be so Browns to trade for a guy who's like never going to live up to his contract. But that being said, is he hasn't had one really solid Deshaun Watson performance. That they've been all defense. So I'm curious if the baseline is shifted downward for the Browns because of perhaps the average performance of Deshaun Watson. I'm kind of curious if that's the case because they don't have a lot of cases of him playing, a lot of instances. So I feel like the Browns' perception numerically is more malleable. So that being said, we're going to be taking the Tennessee Titans, and this is a game I might actually watch.
Back guy. Next up, Houston Texans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars are 10-point favorites at home. Juice opened at -102. It's currently at -104. Is this too many points for Jacksonville?
I don't know. This is a pretty bad Texans team. There's got to be optimism though for Texans. They have a lot of high draft picks. I'm just not sure that they're going to be getting it done in terms of coaching. I'm kind of interested in that. Again, I don't really have too many opinions on that, but I've been using coaching metrics to kind of bet on we'll call them exotics or props. So that's why I give the tip of the hat, tip of the shade to Ron Rivera. There's a bunch of things he silently does better than just about everybody, which is shocking. But that being said, Demico Ryans is he's made some mistakes. We'll call them. Again, I'm alluding to an angle. I just can't give it away. Maybe in a year or two when it dries up, I can explain what I did. But that being said, we're going to take Houston. We're going to take the 10 points. But I would suggest in terms of a circle back, call back as they call it, to the Giants-San Francisco game, this probably has very similar win probability when you look at the money line. And I bet you out of the four big favorites, Jacksonville gets picked the least. I mean, of course, when you make those choices, you're going to want to think about what your competition would choose. But I think Jacksonville, in terms of it most likely, is probably the best survivor pick for anybody out there trying to make a selection. So I know we're not doing survivor, but I think it's worth noting.
That guy. Next up, the New England Patriots travel to New York to take on the Jets, who's opened at 2.5-point dogs at -106. They're currently +3 at -118. Who you got?
Well, we're a juiceless contest, and we're going to get +3 at -118. Giddy up. I find it very interesting, though. +3. This is, I mean, it's the Jets, but it's a Jets that's kind of hapless on offense. This is I think this is very indicative of how strong their defense is. And one thing I'm kind of curious about here as well is like a quarterback injury for the Jets. I don't think that would change much at all. Kind of like I think Indianapolis, which we'll get to later, the switch to Minshew would be, which is what happened. That might even be a push in win probability. Like whoever they end up starting over Zach Wilson, if that were to happen, like that might not change anything unless it was an emergency quarterback. Whereas now, which is kind of interesting, why I'm talking about this angle is a defensive injury to the Jets of a key player. Let's see a Quinnen Williams, something of that caliber. I don't think a corner would get it done, but even Sauce Gardner. But I think my guess maybe Quinnen Williams, but like one defensive lineman might be worth more than Zach Wilson. Think of comparatively. So when you're kind of trying to ascertain effects on a game, this is one that's strange to me in that like a defensive injury, if that's the type of angles you were chasing, this would have a larger effect than usual because the quarterback position isn't as valuable in this game. Like I think it's definitely the defensive line is where the strength of the win probability added is for the New York Jets. So just another angle that I think I'd like to try to bring up ideas for people to look at. And again, that's not an angle I'm pursuing. But that being said, we're going to take the Jets at -118, but it's a juiceless contest. So at even +3.
Next up, we have the Denver Broncos traveling to Miami to take on the Dolphins, who opened as 6.5-point favorites at -110. Still 6.5-point favorites. The juice has only moved down 1 point to -109. Fat guy, who you got?
This is an interesting line. Very interesting. This opened as the consensus line opened. I'm not using Pinnacle. I will revert back to it at 3.5 on June 1st. At -3.5 even for Miami. So I kind of like looking at these from time to time because of the shift in perception. So it kind of gives you a good baseline going forward is the gap in the two, assuming there is an injury that has created, which I don't think you could really make a strong argument for either team. So that like Miami got whatever the money line is. I'm not going to reflect on that right now. Between 3.5 and 6.5, that implied probability shift does suggest that Miami is perhaps a little bit better than what was once thought in the offseason, and Denver is perhaps a little bit worse. Sean Payton, another poor coach when it comes to in-game management. Man, I'm giving away so much. And that being said, we are going to be taking the Miami Dolphins. Pinnacle didn't have much of a move, though. Those were look-ahead lines I was motioning to. Pinnacle is held strong at -6.5, and there's just 1 cent of juice off from opening. And yeah, so we're just going to take Miami. It's purely a contest pick with the juice favoring Miami. So in a juices contest, Miami Dolphins.
That guy. Next up, we have the Indianapolis Colts traveling to Baltimore to take on the Ravens, who opened as 8.5-point favorites at -106. Currently bet down to -7.5 at -104. So I know you hinted earlier at the possibility of Minshew playing. Is it Minshew projected to play or Richardson?
I believe Richardson has a concussion as of now, and I think I don't think he's been ruled out, but I think it's more likely that Minshew plays. Don't quote me on that, guys. I don't. Injury news is a thing for me, but it's a work in progress. So I'm working on the back end, not the live end of it right now. It's in production. That being said, there's an interesting thing. The consensus line I'm looking at here on the June 1st, the spread Indy +8 at even money. That's fantastic. Very interesting. So now the current line we have is Baltimore -7.5 from Pinnacle, -104. That's pretty close. So is Baltimore a little bit worse? Is Indy a little bit better? Is that perhaps the case, or are there some injuries at play here? Regardless, we're going to be taking the Indianapolis Colts. We're going to take the points, and I'm kind of curious what the gap would be. Like that would be something to pay attention to. Is let's just say Gardner Minshew plays. Let's just say Gardner Minshew has a good performance, and then next year next week rather, they're deciding which quarterback to start, and then when one's announced over the other, the shift in win probability, like how does the market react to that? Because then that would give you a good gap, like because you can there are a lot of things you can extrapolate from information like that. Like how does the money line change from when they decide which quarterback versus how it closes? It's going to tell you what the market feels the value between those two quarterbacks, and that would give you a good idea. If for instance, someone like Bryce Young had a competent backup. And I'm calling Gardner Minshew a competent backup because he does have some decent wins and experience under his belt. So point of intrigue to watch out for in this Indianapolis game in terms of the market's perception of quarterback value between a backup and a young starter, we'll call it, in Anthony Richardson. Indianapolis Colts plus the points.
That guy. Next up, Carolina Panthers at the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks opened -6 at -110. The juice has moved in the favor of Carolina having a better chance of winning this game at +6, -114. Your thoughts on this game?
This has been steadfast. I'm kind of curious. This is one of the teams that, like, again, doesn't have strong priors. So it's possible that Carolina kind of gains a lot of steam quickly, like kind of turns a corner. Like it's not going to be like a nice linear thing. I think the learning curve will go more straight up if Carolina is to improve. Like I don't think they can get really much worse than they are. I do believe in their coaching, and that's again all baked into the line. But I'm trying to give you ideas in terms of like how the market might undervalue or overvalue something in the future, and the learning curve, let's call it, for Carolina perhaps could be on the steeper end. So they could become a little bit better than they've been playing going forward and defy the priors that have been set. Because they've I guess their better performance was yesterday, which still wasn't that good. So I think that there'd be a chance that in some of the opening lines there'd be meat on the bone on Carolina going forward. We're going to be I guess opining to that by taking them in the contest. But again, this isn't something I would bet on. This is purely a contest pick. Carolina Panthers.
We've got an interesting line here. I think if you looked at a lot of power rankings, you might have the Dallas Cowboys at 1, 2, or 3, and the Arizona Cardinals are probably cemented at the bottom for a lot of people. But this is a lot of points here. As you can see, the juice has moved in favor of the Arizona Cardinals, opening at plus 13 at minus 110, but currently plus 13 at minus 116. Do you think this can get up to 14, or do you think 13 might be the price to go? I'm not saying it's good to bet either side, but where do you think this ends up settling as lines close on Sunday?
Excellent point he brings up. Knowing where a line moves is half the battle. That will get you in trouble in small sports like tennis because they run what's called a closing line report. So if you beat the closing line, they didn't limit you on a rec book going forward. That's unlikely to ever happen in the NFL unless you were betting serious amounts of money. But what does that tell you? That little story I mentioned about tennis, it tells you the value of the value that books place on closing line value. And Big Rye kind of hinted at it, is how you should be thinking is not who I think is going to win the game, not who I think is going to be winning by how many points, but where do I think the market is going to settle on that number, because that is an efficient market. So you should be thinking in those terms. Obviously, that's the most base level of thinking, though. It's your opinion needs to be extremely unique to be able to pick it off. And that's why I always suggest things like the contest to see if you really can beat the market. And it's extremely unlikely versus, especially with the juice. Those numbers are just really efficient with all the opinions in. And what's my opinion on where I think the market would shift? I used to have one more so. I believe in it less because I like studying the processes. And I think it's more likely to just probably settle on like Arizona 12.5. That's what I think. Probably because 14 becomes a more key number uh, between two teams of these types of caliber. Arizona with an epic meltdown against the New York Giants. That was another thing that I found interesting, just in terms of, and aside from my angle and numerical focus, is I always wondered would that have been a firing like consideration? The New York Giants, would they be set in motion a little bit if he did blow that game against Arizona? Well, he came back, so technically Arizona blew the game. But anyways, I thought that was interesting that would be that would put him in consideration.
It would be at least it would be talked about. And what's interesting too about what you're saying is if this line pushes down to 12.5, it will be an indicator that the books want more, I don't want to say sharp action, but more not sharp action to come in on the Dallas Cowboys, most likely.
Perhaps that is possibility. But there's also an argument too that people like the Cardinals at that evaluation at 12.5. So the consensus line right now is 11.5. Pinnacle has a bit of an offshoot here at minus 13. A lot of times Pinnacle is interesting in that it manipulates juice around numbers to try and generate action on certain numbers. Again, I can't read completely through the lines of what they do. It's incredibly interesting though. And there's a variety of podcasts where a lot of past Pinnacle employees do talk about the method. And, for my money, that's about as interesting as it gets, because it's a window into, essentially with the masters of the universe in the betting world, how they shape a market, how they market that market to double down on the term. And it's very interesting. So I think it's going to be 12.5. That would be that's a good question to ask. And that's a good way of thinking about things going forward. Arizona plus the points.
Next up, we have the Bears traveling to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. Another exorbitant spread here where the Chiefs open minus 13 at minus 104. The line's pushed up to minus 13.5 at plus 104, which might not even be a move at all considering where the juice is at.
Correct. See, that's another thing we're just explaining about Pinnacle moving lines. And when you look at point distribution, it becomes, when the totals are higher, which this total, just to quickly give you a accurate aside, it's not super high, but it's 48. But that has more weight than, let's say, a 39.5 of Tennessee and Cleveland. So that is going to brings less value to the points. And when the spread's this large, let's just give you an example. Think about it. You're going to take the median of 48, and then you're going to distribute that between both teams. So you're going to come up with like a score like, I don't know, 33 to 33-18 or something like that. Like you have to think of it in terms of or 30-17. Like you have to think of like how that score will get distributed because it's going to be close to the spread and closer to the total, the most median of scores, and it kind of branches out from there to the unlikely. Because think about it, when you tail it out, like the most unlikely score would be Kansas City. Let's just say 100-0. It's never happened, but let's say out of a million iterations, it might happen twice. And then the other one would be Chicago Bears 100-0. Well, that's never happened, but it might happen in a million iterations once. And then it kind of converges in the middle in the curve. And it would be something like, 30-17 for Kansas City. Like that might be the median, or, 28-18, something in all in those. Like I'm just giving you really rough edges, but you can use the total and the spread to kind of have an idea of where the market feels the distribution is for this game. And what does that all culminate in is that the points are very flexible. So the spread, the shift of a point here and there beyond say 11 is mostly an innocuous move, and like you're rarely going to beat the juice even if you get an extra point in these types of scenarios. Whereas like in the Browns Tennessee example earlier, that half point, that's a very valuable half point, which is funny because that half point's worth probably more than any point between 11 and up. Very, very interesting because, football's not like basketball. It's non-linear, the distribution of points. So that all being said, we'll take Chicago and the points and move on.
Next up, we have the Steelers at the Raiders. Raiders opened as 1-point dogs. They've been bet up to 2.5-point favorites here at -110, on the verge of possibly pushing up to 3-point favorites here. Fat Guy, what are your thoughts on this?
This
market?
has to be injury related, but I don't recall anyone getting hurt on Pittsburgh. I must have missed some news. I know there's Minkah Fitzpatrick, but that's never gonna. I don't think
Move
that's
a
ever
line
gonna
this
generate.
much.
No. So unless there's some Pickett news, which I'm just gonna quickly take a look here, because it's kind of interesting that there has to be some. I mean, maybe not. Maybe he's just hurt or
It
like
might not even be
slightly
injuries,
injured.
though. It might be because they played on Monday night and it's less time. Like it might be one of those things where it's just one less day kind of moves that market.
Yeah, it's just strange to me, and I'm gonna look through some of my injury sources and try and culminate. But Big Rai is right. This could just be markets attacking a soft line. Uh, and what's interesting about that, if there is no injuries and this is just a natural move, that means the opening was weak. And why is that good news, Fat Guy? That means it's beatable because this is a pretty big jump. And I just want to bring up the money line to magnify that uh, out of curiosity. The money line moved from Las Vegas -104 to Las Vegas -139. That's enormous.
That's a big move.
That's a
And
big move.
what else is interesting that I'll add in is I've been roughly calculating what opening line should be, and this opening line, according to very, very basic math, would have been Steelers -2.5. So even though it opened at -1, it's now moved to +2.5. These are some, I don't want to say significant line moves, but there's definitely something going on that's happened to move this market over those numbers.
Well, I think it has something to do with week priors. Like there's a possibility that Steelers are overvalued or Vegas is undervalued. But any which way you slice it, if there's no injury, which I'm going to have to check after, and I implore you guys to do so. If there's no significant injury, then this is this means that opening lines, and just for reference, when did it open, so that you can perhaps peruse to see an opportunity. This opened on the 19th at 6:22 a.m. Pacific time on Pinnacle. So, and let me just take one, and it's off the board right now, I think, at Bet365, but that just might be my odds screen misinterpreting or not, or having their lines down with Bet365. But if it is off the board, then there's a possibility of that injury as well. So Anyways, very interesting stuff. Very interesting shift. Something to look into. That all being said, we are going to be taking the Las Vegas Raiders, and we're going to lay the point.
Fat guy up next. The another doubleheader Monday Night Football. Philadelphia Eagles at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bucks opened as 6.5-point dogs, -106. They've moved down to +5.5 at -114. So they've passed that faux key number of 6, I guess you could say, and the juice as well as +5.5 at -114. Was this just too many points for the Eagles?
It might be. It might be. There's also, I think the Eagles are unique in that they're, I think they have like a decoupling. I think I've mentioned this a couple times in the past, perhaps last year. Their money line, I don't think lines up like to the traditional money line versus the spread. You know what I mean? Like, I think they have a higher chance of winning than
By a
the
lot,
average.
or higher chance of like they have more variance in their
Yeah,
final scores, I
but
guess you could
covering.
say.
So like, I think they would win more than the average 5.5. So like the line. So for instance, they might have a money line that's congruent with that of a 6.5-point favorite, but they're really a 5.5-point favorite because of the points distribution, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're
Because
saying that there could be jumps in iterations. If you played this a million times, they would have more iterations where they win by, let's say, 7, then they win by
because
3.
6 is the key number, right? So they would win. They wouldn't be able to. They would cover less than they should for a 6.5. 6.5 point favorite, but they would win more, if that makes any sense. That's something that's kind of like becoming nuanced, I think, and that's an angle I haven't 100% researched. I've actually only lightly researched, and that might be another suggestion for somebody else to do. I'm trying to give out angles this year, everybody, or at least ideas on angles, and that's one that I'm glad came up because it is an intrigue. I mean, you're not going to make $1 billion, but you might be able to recognize a good price from a bad one. And think about it, even if you were a money line expert just on the Eagles, that would be enough to make you a few cents here and there. And you could pick off weak lines at rec books, and you could probably make a small profit, which that would be a wonderful year. It would be a wonderful NFL season for a lot of people. That being said, with that spiel, the point seems like the play. Uh, not endorsing it. Contest pick, Bucks in the points.
And then the second half of the doubleheader, Rams at Bengals. Bengals open at 1.5-point favorites at -106. The juice has only moved up to -108. This one has, considering there hasn't been any injuries, I don't know if you have any of the earlier lines for this game, but as far as opening, this would have been almost a touchdown favorite, maybe, if this line came out week 1. So it's very interesting to see that it's moved down to 1.5, and it's essentially stayed at 1.5. So people are really down on the Bengals, really high on the Rams after these first 2 weeks.
Big Rye doesn't even know, and he's pulling out exactly what happened pretty much. Week 1, exactly a 7-point favorite. But let's look at the early line. 8.5 on June 1st, point favorites. 9 points. We're giving you the consensus line. Pinnacle didn't have it up, so the consensus is skewed because Pinnacle, since it didn't have it up, it's not priced into the consensus line. Therefore, the consensus line isn't as sharp as it could be. But I have to preface that it's still good. It's still interesting point of data. So it went up to 9. And then from there on, it went down to 7.5 and then to 7 a week ago. And look where we are, Big Rye. We're at 2 points. I mean,
this is an unbelievable line move with really, I don't know if there's any injury news on either side.
Joe Burrow has calf soreness. So I don't know if this means it's indicative that he's out, but I don't think that he is. So I'm kind of curious. This must be slated that he's 60% out if that's the case. So here we go. We have an exercise that we're going to be able to do here. Is if a week ago it was 7.5, or 7 rather. I'm seeing some 6s, so let's just call it 6 even. A week ago, we'll call it 6 points. Actually, no, sorry, it is 7. We'll call it 7 points here. And now it's 2. If it closes at 2, let's just flip to the money line. Sorry, I don't want to lose this. This is maybe the most important point of the video here. So I'm just going to bring the money line because you're going to get a better idea of the implied probability if I orate the money line over the shift in points, because we already know those shift in points. Let's just nail it real quick here. So if they went from minus 286, which is about a week ago, to minus 117, and it closes in and around minus 117, that tells you that the current line is factor is if Joe Burrow is not playing. Therefore, the closing line will reflect a non-Joe Burrow playing Bengals. So then you can compare the implied probability between a minus 285, this has no juice, and whatever the closing line is with no juice. So if you subtract that implied probability of minus 285 minus the closing no juice line, assuming it's anywhere from like minus 105 to minus 125, that should give you a really strong approximation of the win probability separation between Joe Burrow and the backup. So we had to take a minute with that one. That one's really important for the viewers. At least I hope so. These are things I'm interested in. This is how I look at betting on sports. And that all being said, Big Rye, let's take Cincinnati because maybe it shifts upward if Joe Burrow does indeed. It's 100 that he does play.
And just to give you guys a rough math estimate of what the fat guy just said, it's about a 20% difference in win probability, which is enormous. Huge after 2 weeks of games and a possible quarterback injury. That's a huge change. On to the lightning round, fat guy. This is our picks for week 3, Thursday night, New York Giants at San Fran.
Big Blue.
Sunday early games, LAC at Minnesota.
Big Purple.
Buffalo at Washington.
Really cool Commanders.
Saints at the Packers.
Yeah, good uniform, Saints.
Falcons at the Lions.
Arthur Smith, the cover machine, I think.
Tennessee at Cleveland.
Tennessee Titans.
Houston at Jacksonville.
Houston.
New England at the Jets.
Beat the Jets.
Denver at Miami.
Miami Dolphins.
Indy at Baltimore.
Quarterback intrigue, the Colts.
Carolina at Seattle.
Carolina.
Dallas at Arizona.
Arizona.
Bears at the Chiefs.
The Bears.
Pittsburgh at Las Vegas.
Las Vegas Raiders.
And then Monday night doubleheader, Philly at Tampa.
Bakers Bucks.
And then the big move, LA Rams at Cincinnati.
Cincinnati Bengals.
Fat guy, week 2 picks against the spread winner was Hodge Boom or Bust, going 13-2-1 against the spread. Good for 87%. Congratulations to Hodge Boom or Bust. Also, congratulations to Amir going 12-3-1, Mickey as well as Jive Turkey going 10-5. And we had a pretty good week, fat guy, 9-6-1, good for 60% against the spread, picking all 16 games. And then congratulations to Amir, 2 very strong weeks, currently at 71%. Hopefully he can keep that up throughout the year.
This is the JS715 Name of the Week. Whoa, kaboom!
And then the JS715 Name of the Week, Zach Wilson, MILF Tour 2.0. Aaron Rodgers going down so Zach Wilson can do what he needs to do around America.
That's about the best he can get done, so at least it's something. It's something.
And then thank you again to all our channel members for supporting our channel. Fat guy, that's it. Everyone at home, make your picks against the spread for week 3 at BigRyanTheFatGuy.com. Fat guy, any final thoughts? We went way shorter this week. This is a big win for us.
Well, that was by design. Big Rye got in my ear. Somebody we both know seems to talk too much.
Good luck for you guys in week 3.